Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for joining our next Regulatory Circle webinar series. And today's topic is more about AI, which is a very hot topic in the medtech field. And we have invited Vic to be our guest speaker today to share his experience. So in the coming program, we have about 20 minutes presentation and about 10 minutes Q&A time. Thank you for your attendance, and I pass to Vic. Thank you, Vic, for your coming.
Thank you, Jack and team, for the invite. Hi, everyone. My name is Vidyaraman. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Deep Dive Labs, and I'm here to talk to you today about artificial intelligence risk management, fundamentals to frameworks. A quick note about my company. We are Deep Dive Labs, a Singapore-based startup, and we have a bunch of dimensions in which we offer services, technology services, education. Since this deck is going to be shared with everyone, I will skip over this in the interest of time and move over to the core content today. Suffice to say, if you have any people talking to you about developing micro SaaS products or getting some sort of educational services around AI, do please think of us. I do want to call out that we are currently developing a micro SaaS product called Reg Experience, which I will be demoing in this particular session. So please stay tuned to it and we can talk more about that. So let us start directly with actually the two motivating case studies. I had initially put in two motivating case studies assuming we had 1 hour, but in the interest of time, I will probably just go through them, one in greater depth and the second on top level. But since the deck will be shared, you will have access to all of the content. Okay. So the first one is from a company called EM2AI. I don't know if they are pronounced EM Square AI, but they are an AI-powered dental charting, team, so to speak. And this is what they had started to do with artificial intelligence and trying to use them. So their background is they are a medical technology startup in Singapore. And one of the problem statements they had identified was that when you think about manual dental charting, it's rather inconsistent, time consuming, and prone to diagnostic error. Of course, they have a lot of human backup in the real world when they are doing it, but obviously that is leading to the time consuming part. They had investigated what they could do with artificial intelligence in order to make things faster and much better for their patients. The specific solution that they had started off was they had developed an AI model that automates interpretation of the X-rays and it generates some standardized charts. Now, not being in the medical field, but having some sort of idea based on my own general experience, I can understand what this means. When we go in for a dental checkup, there is an X-ray that is taken out, and then the doctor and the technician and the others, they have to interpret these X-rays and they have to give a diagnosis, which is pretty much the standardized process for most of the medical analysis, with of course nuance for every specific case. And they had tried to do this with an AI model so that they could just read the dental X-rays and they could do a lot of work on that. According to their executive summary, these were some of the impacts. The impacts are, sometimes time consuming, sometimes they are time savings, and there is enhanced accuracy as well. But of course, during the implementation phase, they would have gone through a lot of work. Now, what I want to go through here is one specific so that I can motivate this notion of artificial intelligence risk management. So what they effectively did was that they had gotten a system to analyze what they call as a full mouth X-ray, and the idea was that once they had an X-ray, they could detect and map it to 4 key dental conditions. So very broadly speaking, think of it as a classification problem where they had an input X-ray and they had to give some sort of an output that said, was it tooth, numbing, was it cavities, bone loss, or missing teeth? Now, they were also able to automatically generate some particular standardized reports for a seamless review as well. This was what their AI solution did. However, and now we come to the actual focus of this particular session, what are the risks involved when people do these kind of AI solutions? They had also considered this, and there were a bunch of items that they had put in. But I want to motivate this talk with the risks and considerations of having an AI solution. And this actually applies for any kind of artificial intelligence solution, whether it is in the healthcare field or in any other place. But that being said, the idea here is to see how the risks are applicable in this particular context. So let us go through this particular slide in greater depth. So the first question that comes to mind is, what if the AI model is either inaccurate or it misinterprets these X-rays? So when you think about this question in depth, you can sort of try to collate it or put it into different dimensions for what the actual risk might be. So one of them could be a misdiagnosis risk. That is to say, you could either miss a condition or you could do over treatment, so to speak. Now, since this particular solution is being deployed at scale, there is the risk of over-reliance. So the dentist may reduce their clinical vigilance because they think that the AI is actually pretty decent or very good at what it does, and therefore there is an over-reliance. There is also, of course, data quality dependence, because whatever X-ray that you have, you need to capture that image in a reasonable quality and then feed it to the AI model. So you can think of a situation where perhaps the training was done with fantastic high quality images, but then during deployment, the images might have been of poor quality, which means that the model accuracy would be would be down, and therefore that could in turn lead to a misdiagnosis risk. There is, of course, bias and generalization. In this particular case, it might not directly apply a whole lot, but sometimes when you have some rare conditions, and since I don't have a medical background, I'm unable to comment directly on it, but you can extrapolate and try to understand what does it mean when you have bias and generalization here. Last but not the least, there is a regulatory and ethical concern. That is to say, if I were to go to a dentist and get my X-ray done, am I actually being informed if my data is being used to train an AI model, and do I have a choice in it or not? So according to these kind of risks, they had a bunch of mitigation strategies that they were able to actually implement, and they have had a reasonably good solution that has been working for them. So let us pause here and try to now go back and zoom out for the bigger picture. We have this new set of technologies, the artificial intelligence technologies, and whether they are generative or they are different kind of deep neural networks that are doing image analysis or diffusion models, regardless of the mathematical background and how they are implemented, because of their unique nature, there are a bunch of risks that keep coming out of them. Now, whenever you talk about the implementation of this AI solution in a particular context, you can analyze what the particular risks could be, and you can try to list them out in this particular way. So, what is AI risk management per se? AI risk management is the field where we are in a position to have a framework so that we can take any AI solution that is implemented for a particular field and then use that framework to understand and categorize what all possible risks are available or could happen as a consequence of that solution and how it can be mitigated. So this is what AI risk management means in the current context. So this is one particular example. The second one, and I will go through this a little bit faster because I want to motivate some of the actual implementation of the frameworks. But again, this is also available in a website. So this is the medical report summarization with generative AI. And the idea here was very simple here. The Changi General Hospital, they wanted to summarize the colonoscopy and histopathology reports using generative AI, and they had to generate it based on some existing protocols that are available. By the way, if you're going to search for USMTF, what you will get from Bing or Google is different, but what protocol is mentioned in that particular website and their report is completely different. So I encourage you to look at the actual report, which I will share post this. So this is their use case, and they had enabled it with some sort of deployment and some technical details as well. This is how they had done their application pipeline. So as a input, they had colonoscopy reports, and that this was all in the form of text. And then they were able to process it using some sort of back-end generative AI. In this particular case, they apparently used Claude. And then they were able to evaluate it based on some rules. So all of this is very neat. Now, again, in the same example here, what are the possible risks here? The first one is the accuracy of the clinical summary. Now, this is something most of us can probably relate to. Most of us have probably heard of this thing called hallucination in AI, wherein sometimes even though you ask the generative AI to come up with a particular response, it may hallucinate and give you some context or information that is not available in your original request. Then there is, of course, the clinical safety and alignment to guidelines. And finally, whether the evaluation metrics, if they are accurate or not. So these are all the possible risks that are available or that are, manifested in this particular context. Now, they had a bunch of key findings, and there's actually a very good report here. But the idea behind this slide, and we'll just focus on the highlighted ones in purple, some recommendations were correct even if the facts were wrong. And one of their other findings was that the SMEs must be involved to handle edge cases in some complex clinical data. So what then is the idea here? The risk is always there and there has to be a mitigation. In this particular case, one of their mitigations was constant human oversight so that the SMEs could either say it was good or they could step in and correct it, which of course leads to the problem of over-reliance. But these are the kind of risks that as a consequence of the implementation of AI in the healthcare field. So with this being said, let us just now zoom out, and we have talked about these two motivating examples from a healthcare standpoint. Let us now just talk about, in general, what are the types of risks for this particular set of healthcare related context. Some of them are mentioned here. This is obviously not a entire list, because the key risk will always vary based on the domain that you work on. Clinical accuracy and safety, we already saw that in one example. Data related, which is to say, suppose if you have some sort of an X-ray image that is not very good quality, then you're going to have accuracy problems. There is model reliability and transparency, which is to say, is the model that is being used, is it developed by the organization themselves, which would be a really huge undertaking, or are they leveraging something else, and how good or reliable is it? There are, of course, operational and deployment concerns, which are a bit of a different nature, but still they are also applicable in the healthcare field. We also saw ethical, legal, and governance. Now, I had initially wanted to expand on each one of these so that we can talk about the kind of risk and relate to them. But again, in the interest of time, since we hardly have, I think, 5 or 10 more minutes, I'm just going to switch over to a demo that you will be able to relate to for all of these risks. Again, you will all have a copy of this particular slide. So all of this data will be available along with a link to the original version from where I had gotten this. So now this is a kind of a cheat sheet for what are the kind of artificial intelligence risks that are applicable within the healthcare domain. And for each one of them, what is the definition and example, and what is the risk that can happen within that particular context. Before I switch over to the demo to motivate what is this particular notion of frameworks, there is obviously a very good question of why now. AI, if you ask some people, has been around for a significant amount of time, and it has exploded right now because of a lot of advancements in a number of fields, GPUs and actual transformer architectures being one of them. So as a consequence of this, there is a bunch of regulations that are now coming up. So EU AI Act is probably the one that a lot of people have been talking about. There is also what is called the White House Executive Orders. And then there are some standards from ISO called 42001. So the impact of all of this is there is an increased accountability for AI governance. And although not many of them are actually mandating anything immediately, except for the EU AI Act, which has some very strict governance for what is called mission critical or very important applications, there isn't a mandate yet from a regulatory standpoint, but it is reasonable to expect that there will be one pretty soon coming up. Okay. So the fundamental question that we all want to know is how can we quantify and manage these risks? For the two examples that we saw, we were able to actually understand and then we were able to hypothesize what the risks are. You can in fact use generative AI to even understand those risks. But we now want to know how we can quantify these risks. Now, in order to quantify them, in the field of regulations, there are these things called the frameworks. Frameworks are effectively a set of controls that will give you a description of what a requirement should be in order to achieve a particular objective. So one such framework is called the NIST AI RMF, which is Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework. This is published by an organization called the NIST, very famous in fact. There is also, of course, the ones from ISO. This is the standards based. This standard for artificial intelligence risk management is called 42001, and this is for AI specific management systems. There is EU AI Act, and in Singapore itself, there is the Singapore AI Verify, which is actually a fantastic technical assessment toolkit. So what we are now going to see is how can we use these frameworks and how they are actually going to be used in practice in order to manage AI risks. Hence the term AI risk management. Okay. Before we go in here, I do want to give a word of caution. This is a highly evolving space because some regulations are pretty straightforward and very well crafted. Some of them are still getting crafted, and most of them are regional and domain specific as well. So the general frameworks that we just talked about, ISO is certifiable, which is to say you can get certified as an organization for ISO. Things like NIST, they are not certifiable, but they are very foundational, and you will see what I mean by that very shortly. And there is, of course, AI Verify, which is a very actionable framework from Singapore. To say that it is a framework is sort of putting it down because they have actually given a toolkit. We have also heard of things called high trust, which is also apparently a standard or a framework, but it's unfortunately not available for analysis. So we are not going to be covering that here. If you have heard of any of them, do please share in the chat and we can discuss this leisure. This is a very quick comparison of all of these frameworks, and there's a bunch of key dimensions here. But one of the important ones from a practitioner standpoint is ISO is prescriptive and certifiable, EU AI Act is mandatory and penalties will apply, and others are very good from a guidance standpoint, and each of them have their own utility, so to speak. So this is the set of frameworks, but this is not comprehensive again. This is just a good start. The Singapore AI Verify is actually reasonable in terms of trying to understand what you can do from an implementation standpoint. There are some company specific frameworks which I have put in here just as an informational. These are not really healthcare specific, but they are also talking about AI risk management, so to speak. There are some common themes across all of them. The first is they are all risk-based approach. Everything has a set of principles, so to speak. Some of them are supposed to be transparent, some of them are accountable, fairness, robustness, and you will see these themes being percolated across all of the frameworks as well. There, of course, there's human oversight and actual life cycle governance too, and that is really useful for large organizations when you start getting into it. This is a very quick overview of the NIST AI RMF. I encourage you to go through it at leisure, but the important characteristics here are again the same themes that I mentioned, and you can see they are expanded here. Accuracy, reliability, explainability is actually a very key part of this, not to mention safety, fairness, and accountability as well. So this is the section on AI risk management. To conclude, AI when it is applied to any field, will always have some sort of risks associated with it. Now, in order to understand what the risks are, you have to go into the context and figure out the types of risks that are available for them. Now, in this particular case, as we talked about, there are a number of risks from a medical standpoint, and we saw incorrect diagnosis, misalignment with guidelines, and these available here. Now, you can take any context, any AI application, and try to understand it with respect to these risks. However, if you want a very structured approach to AI risk management, what you really want to do is take one of these frameworks that we just talked about, and the frameworks will give you very clear guidelines on what you can measure and all the different dimensions, some of which may be applicable in some cases, some of which are not, and then they would be very useful in terms of actually creating a risk management program, so to speak. Another advantage of generalized frameworks is once you have a framework, then you can repeat that particular evaluation once your model changes or for any new business process. So with this, I will stop my presentation here. I'm happy to take any questions on this. I'm also happy to stay back for a longer period of time in case people would like to talk, and you can reach out to me DM on LinkedIn as well, and we can talk more. Thank you, Jack. Back to you.
Thank you, Vic, for the very we call it an impossible way to sharing. In a short time, you need to cover so many things like that. But I think our intention is to raise the awareness or critical understanding of this AI topic. You may not become an expert after that, but at least you are aware, all the key box here, so that you may be able to reach out or find out a solution accordingly, like that. And I think Tiffany have questions. You say how harmonized are all these framework? Vic, what do you think?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Because this is an evolving field, some of them are relatively harmonized, whereas some of them aren't. And the notion of harmonization is defined in the regulatory field as something called a crosswalk. So let me show that to you with the example of the NIST framework here. So if you look at the actual framework, there are these things called on the left hand side a crosswalk document. So a crosswalk document is something that says I have the NIST framework and here are the controls that are relatively the same or very similar to other frameworks. So here you can see as an example, the NIST even gives you a crosswalk between their framework and the Singapore IMDA AI framework, and so to speak. So to succinctly answer your question, the principles are relatively the same, and therefore there is a relative harmonization amongst them. However, each framework has its own applicability. NIST is very guidance specific. There are some other ones which are called supervisory guidance on model risk management. These are very, very model specific and not necessarily overall governance. There is only a few for governance if you look at it, but for model validation and model use, there are more. So the harmonization is there from a principle standpoint. With respect to actual specifics, they are actually very different, and each framework will have its own advantages. So when you're going to pick a framework, it really depends on what your objective is, and you need to pick one that is very useful to you based on your use case. That was a long-winded response to what was a very short question, but the question was actually quite insightful and impactful, hence the long-winded statement. One more thing that you might want to look at is the Responsible AI Architects Guide, and you can see they are harmonized across the project roles, so to speak. Thank you. Back to you, Jack.
Thank you. And I think AI is a learning curve, not only to company, but also to regulator as well. Everybody's still developing their standard or guidance document on it. So I think we are maybe not in the phase to talk about harmonization yet. We are still in the learning curve like that. So that's why it's a hot topic, and I hope everyone found it exciting. And David also mentioned that there's an ISO standard, ISO 13485 for medical device, and you are talking about risk management. So is ISO 13485, if I got an ISO 13485 for my medical device, can I say I cover risk management?
It really depends. I am not familiar with ISO 13485 2016, but I assume that it is very specific to medical devices. The point is, if the medical device is using some sort of AI in order to deliver its result, then either the standard will need to be updated in order to account for the AI risks, or you will have to apply the other ones around 42001 in order to account for AI. The reason being the mechanism of how this particular medical device is delivering its result is probably dependent on some sort of an AI model, and the dimensions of assessing the risk of the AI model, not just the medical device alone, that is covered in 42001, not in the medical devices unless they have updated it. That would be my guess to get started with.
Thank you. And David, for your information, ISO 13485, strictly speaking, cover risk management, which is the for risk management called ISO 14971. I type it in the meeting chat as well. So strictly speaking, it covers because when your reviewer or auditor review check your manufacturing plan, they will also look for risk management, and at that time, you have your plan, everything to cover, etc. But of course, when you come to AI, is more different risks. Risk management is just a framework, identify the risk, how frequent it happens, then how you solve it. Having that kinds of framework, not that difficult. The difficult part is doing it. And I think today week's presentation is how to do it. Knowing the risk, then what to do, like that. So strictly speaking, you will cover, but how to do it is the tricky part. That's why I think you may find the sharing today helpful. Okay, and that may be why HSA don't require you to get another ISO certificate. For example, ISO 14971, like that. That one is optional. Okay, I hope David will answer your questions. Okay, good. Okay, so Vega, one thing, because AI keep on changing, I want to learn from you. What are other resource or website or a place I can keep my AI knowledge up to date, because this AI is so volatile, so many school of thought maybe, and so many things. So in your case, how you keep yourself updated, know what's going on in the AI regulatory field, for example?
No, that is actually a fantastic question, because the field is so dynamic, and what we want to learn is also depending on the context that we have. So on a personal note, we in Deep Dive Labs, what we end up doing is we either are subscribing to all of the latest conferences that are happening in AI, and we both try to participate in them, and we watch the practitioners talk. So there is this person called Andrei Karpathy, who is actually very famous. He in fact coined the term vibe coding amongst others. So he has a bunch of nice tutorials. There's a few others who also have a lot of very hardcore tutorials on what AI does. And there are a number of others in YouTube, as well as professional places like Maven, where they teach you about AI from a different angle. So the way we personally keep in touch and up to date is trying to learn through watching all the practitioners give a talk. I would of course be remiss if I didn't talk about deeplearning.ai. That is actually a fantastic place to learn as well. This is how we are keeping ourselves abreast of all the technologies. In case of whether how you want to do it, it would really depend at which level you would like to learn from it. I would recommend just a couple of nice conferences, maybe once in 6 months. Once you read through it or listen to some talks, you would actually get a gist of what is happening. But be prepared, it might change in just a few days. because the field is changing so fast, or sometimes not at all. Depends on whom you ask and what dimension. Again, a long-winded response, but that's actually a very broad question. So I hope that is helpful. I can also share some resources that you can share with the general folks as well, so they can also look into things if they would like to keep themselves abreast in certain specific dimensions.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we overrun a little bit, but I think it's the right timing, about 30-something minutes. And I hope the team found the sharing helpful. By the way, you know it now, and able to find more information if required. And I would like to thank you for the team here to support our regulatory circle group, which is me and Crystal are running. And we will have more webinar or workshop coming up. We have workshop every month until end of the year already. So the coming one will be European update. I think you can look at the invitation accordingly. And I think that's all from my side. And I also put down one more information is the cyber security label scheme that I recently learned about. Is good. The good news is it's voluntary, but maybe also a good thing you want to do it. So I just attach in the meeting chat for your information. I think that's all from my side, and thank you for your time today. Thank you, Vic.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.